Because we've seen this, we've read this memo 550 times. Hmm.
That's the start of the recording. Welcome
Okay.
to the Transportation Task Group.
Welcome. Happy Monday on this blazing hot, lovely Monday, last Monday of August. Okay. Jane, did you drop the agenda in the chat? So Greta is unable to be here to take minutes. I don't know if someone would be willing to take some high level synopsis minutes.
I can put minutes together for next week out, but there'll be nothing like Greta's.
I know there are nothing like Greta's minutes. They're really wonderful.
But I'm happy to do that.
That'd be great. Thank you. I know if anyone had anything to reflect on last week's minutes. Otherwise, I think we want to talk about the memo one more time and like sort of prep for the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee meeting next week, and anything we want to say to prep for the council meeting. We can just review and remind ourselves of the thoughts on like timeline and process for the council. Talk a little bit about the budget, and then like updates related to the upcoming Advanced Clean Cars, Advanced Clean Truck events, and any updates on the carbon reduction strategy contract and public comment and anything else. Do people have anything else they wanted to add to the agenda? Okay. On the memo, Megan O'Toole had put together a document that people could edit through PowerShift or whatever that platform is that the state uses. And then Gina had sent me some pretty significant edits aimed at like really sort of trimming it, cleaning it up a little bit, and clarifying the bullets. So I synthesized those. I am not sure if I missed any edits in the platform that Megan had, so I was having trouble accessing it.
Liz Miller had a pretty significant comment too. She isolated the modeling bullet out, which I thought was good to do.
Well, are you talking about an old edit? Because I had,
whoa, is that an old edit? Sorry, I can't.
No, it's fine. There have been so many iterations of this document.
I saw that and I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's good.
Yeah, no, she added some very helpful input. I had just left a comment because I wanted to just make sure we had addressed it. Bram had added some good input. I don't know if it's, I guess the long and the short of it is, have people read the latest version? Is there anything else? No. Okay.
And in
I have not had a
chance
chance to, and I know I made some edits. I'm trying to like remember what those were and if they're reflected here.
In my trimming, I hope I didn't eliminate any meaning. I was very careful to keep it, just to trim it down, not to change the meaning anywhere. There are some redundancies. Yeah, I think, Andrea, it's really important for VTrans to sign off on the description of the work you're going to do. Make sure we got that right, because we don't want Michelle or somebody to say, oh no, that's not how it's going to work. So it would be good to make sure that, because that's a real critical piece of this.
You mean with the incentives specifically, or for the
no the whole
strategy
of the carbon reduction strategy? And how, really the crux of this is that's going to go on, but then what else needs to happen? That's the real question, I think, before people. First of all, they need to know what this is because it's new. The carbon reduction strategy is something nobody's on the council and has really heard about in any great detail. So they need to know what that is, and then they need to know why this other work needs to happen. Those are, to me, the main thesis of the piece.
Maybe a couple of updates and thoughts as maybe, Andrew, if you want to give it a quick review. Just a reminder that ultimately we get this memo to as good of a place as possible that we feel good about for an ensuing conversation at cross sector. So it's not like this is like the final product. There's still a conversation and sort of refinement and work to do, and then ideally get to a place where cross-sector lifts up something for the full council to consider at the September 12th board meeting. That's the process. And then we talked briefly, I believe it was at our last meeting, about sort of when we spoke to the council. Jane's walking away, but giving the council an update with the new Andrea providing a little bit of summation of what the carbon reduction strategy is, what the obligation is, and what that work is, and how that, is sort of a baseline, foundational component of this work. So just context setting, I think, to your point, Gina, but that is something we had talked about, and we had also sort of talked about maybe Jared providing an update, because the EAN progress report is going to be hot off the presses in a week or so. Sort of, again, just grounding the council, who hasn't regrouped on this topic as a full entity in a while, just some updated information based on, again, the carbon reduction strategy and other VTrans work that is important and relevant, and then the just EAN analysis to set the stage for having a conversation about the recommendation. Those are just two pieces.
What day is the council meeting? I don't know what.
Well,
September 12th.
Oh, that far out. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Okay.
That all sounds really good, Joey.
So, I mean, unless there are things or deep concerns about the memo, I mean, I think ultimately, again, it's meant to be a reflection of a lot of the good input that we have heard from many of you and others, and it's now ideally good enough, and strong enough to live for cross-sector conversation next week and then onward.
Yeah, I think just having, like Gina said, if you cut it a bunch for clarity, having Andrea review that would be great.
So cross-sector is next Thursday, the 8th. Is that what it is?
the 7th.
They're Wednesday.
Wednesday,
Mhm.
the 7th,
Oh, I don't have that in my calendar
at noon.
at noon. I better get that in there. I mean, I don't know that I can be there. I'm leaving to go to Italy on Wednesday.
Oh, sounds way more fun.
The time zones that direction don't work really well for stuff here in the daytime. Okay.
You could talk to TJ.
Yeah.
I don't intend to have this ruin my vacation.
No. He just got back from Italy.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
He managed being there for a month. That's why I was joking.
A month?
Where he was off. Mhm.
Oh my God.
Mhm.
Apparently AARP gets 7 weeks off every summer. His wife was off for 7 weeks. Andrea, what is happening at the state?
I don't think every summer. I think that was a special sabbatical, but I could be wrong, and I'd be real jealous.
He said it's annual.
Oh,
Once you've been
mhm.
there 7 years, it's annual. Mhm.
Well, everyone else is retired, so that makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I can look this over. I don't see anything glaring right now, but I'd prefer to just take a look at it after and let you know if there's anything. Michelle just looked, she didn't look at this, 'cause she hasn't seen this, but she looked at an older version and said, like, what about VMT and our work in that? And what, and I was
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
like, well, that's like the other, or, I forget what our other comments were. I just read it right before I got on here, but,
That's not in there.
oh, it was just about like the EVSC. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to
Have every last thing that's going on.
Well,
reiterate
the-
everything that's already a recommendation in the plan, right?
Exactly. That second
Exactly.
bullet was intended to get at, like,
That's all.
we shall go forward and implement the other components of the plan, and the VMT component of it and that work is a big piece of that. It wasn't
Right.
intended to highlight like everything else.
Right. That's how I saw it too.
Okay. Is there anything else to say about that? If you have any, great. If you
I,
have
I,
any,
I think I gotta say this. I wish Chris were here so I could say it in front of him. He raised a really important issue, but there are all kinds of issues. That the issue of people who drive long distances tend to be poor and should be first in line, are more, and I shouldn't say poor. They have more energy dependency and they're low income in rural settings, and that's a really important point. But there's all kinds of really important points out there. Like today or yesterday in the New York Times, there was a story about battery sizes. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's really compelling that the auto industry is trying to build these big batteries in the cars to foster a lifestyle that's going to be problematic in the long run because people are going to be driving too much. And it just had it was just a really interesting view on something I hadn't really, and then all the impacts associated with the production of batteries. And I hadn't really thought about that. And I thought, God, this is something. Did you guys read it?
I haven't read it.
No, well, I'll send it around afterwards. But I mean, there's so many different ways to think about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a couple of articles sent around recently too. I can't remember which meeting.
I mean, there's just so much, and to what extent, and what Chris is talking about is a really big change in the way we administer the programs, and it's not something that can you just flick a switch and it'll change. But I mean, we need to be ready for those kinds of changes. But to what extent do we talk about them now that could burden us down in doing some basic things that we need to do? I'm not saying it's not a bad thing to raise, but it's just in terms of process, it was confusing to me, but maybe I'm the only one. So
Yeah, I have to talk with Patrick further. Chris and Patrick and I met a couple of days after last week's meeting to just sort of talk about the incentives and what we might
be able to do.
envision getting out of the consultant work, which is still in the works. But and I don't think Patrick has had many conversations about any details about the differing options or analysis that might come out of how to do it. But there's we want to get more EVs on the road, and we want to do that in an equitable way. So I think the way it was written before kind of forced the incentive program in a direction, and the way it's rewritten now says one potential option is to look at this rather than already determining what the
Right.
optimization should tell us.
And I'll tell you, this is not for the faint of heart. When you start asking people how much they drive, even though it gets recorded at odometer, and V-Trans went through this when we were looking at pay-as-you-go taxation. There's been a ton of studies nationally. When you start, especially rural people, you start telling them you can't drive that far, or you shouldn't be driving that far, you're running into a whole nest of issues around privacy and it's not as simple as it sounds. And it would take a lot of effort, I think, to get something like that up and running, based on what he was describing.
I mean, I think it was still, as proposed by Chris, is still an incentive. It's not a mandate or requirement.
Right.
So,
Right. But to get it, you got to start telling people how much you drive, and
but
I don't know. It's hard
Yeah.
not to get people to tell you how much they make.
So I
Yeah,
think
but
did that most of the like dwindling down of the language come in the bullets?
yes.
Yes.
So probably it's fine, but like I said, I'll give one more full look.
I didn't change. I mean, I took the way you had written the carbon reduction strategy like that. Like the whole first page essentially did not change. It's like, and then the other stuff changed. It's just meant to be more succinct and clear and responsive to the substantive input that we had gotten. And ideally, that's what it is. So it's not our last bite at this apple either again. So there's cross sector too, but
Yeah.
if you have any further input, I have a Word version if you want to redline it, Andrea, before we send it to cross sector, but.
Okay, I think I'm looking at the Word version right now. So
Oh, good. Well,
you sent
there
it
you
around,
go.
right? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Do we want to move on? Everyone feels
Yes.
great. Excellent. The budget conversation. Jean, do you have any more input? I know you weren't able to join us last week, but any more context that would be helpful beyond cross sector is going to have a conversation on June or whatever, September 6th too, about the budget. Is there anything else more to say that would provide helpful context about how we should frame up our wants, asks, and like through reality check that a little bit? No?
I mean, last week we talked about this briefly here, and I had missed the cross-sector meeting, but understood
Right.
that TJ and Rich wanted you all to assimilate recommendations up to them for that meeting. And I mean, you have these discrete bullets. I think it would be really helpful, even if just now as a group we walked through those bullets, and if there was consensus around which ones could use resources, and get a sense for that. And I think I have it open. If you want me to, I can share my screen, or we could talk through each one. But that would be just an interesting conversation, because the analyses maybe not, but, or maybe I'm wrong, but the analyses might not, but some of the engagement. And then it would be important to dovetail any asks that might overlap with other subcommittees with them to lift up, and I can help you figure out which ones might. Let me open it.
Yeah, you want to walk us through that? That'd be great.
I think the modeling and analysis is something that would be good to have a firm a number as possible. And I turn to Colin and others and Jared to help us frame that up.
It looked like I froze. Did I freeze to all of you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, not your face, just
Can't see your screen yet.
we can't see your screen.
Now?
You're not frozen. Ah,
Mhm.
yes.
Okay. It looked like it finally went. It doesn't look very big though. Let me try to zoom in for you guys. A little bit. I can't figure out how to do that online. Can you guys see those?
Yeah,
I'll just
I
talk
can-
through.
Yeah, we can see it, I think.
Top middle
Okay.
has the plus sign anyway, Jean.
Thank you, Andrew. There you go. Okay, so do you want to just take them one by one and see if you think they need funding? Continuing to advance the transportation recommendations laid in the climate action plan. That's a really catch-all, so I don't know if there's specific funding around any of that, but I imagine no.
Is anyone at the state keeping track of what the plan costs and the various
Well,
programs? Yeah, how they all
Not
add
what the
up?
plan costs, but we, as a climate action office, are starting to talk about how we track implementation of the CAP, and intend to do that across the climate action plan, and are just starting to think about what that framework looks like to do so. So both at like sooner rather than later at a high level of like what the strategies are and the actions are and how we're advancing those. And then obviously the development of the measuring and assessing progress tool will have a more fine-grained like target level asks, but we still don't really have economic data for specific policies. So we don't know what the whole plan costs per se. So
Well, I was thinking more of just state outlay. So for instance, we need X amount of incentives, and we need X amount of charging infrastructure. We're spending X amount now, then there's a gap. And I know somebody's kind of figured that out, like, right? To get to the numbers of electric vehicles that are necessary. This would be the easiest calculation. It's going to require a certain investment on the part of the state, both to underwrite the incentives and the cost of the infrastructure in the federal government. And that's coming from different, mostly from VTrans, and how much is being spent. And I know you guys have figured that out. And what's the gap to get to the numbers we need?
So this was something that Jared highlighted when we talked about the budget, which was that you can think of this in two ways, like one-time asks to help move the needle on specific strategies and actions or analyses that support that, or larger, like long-term implementation funding associated with lifting up specific programs or actions. And that's obviously much harder to think about. There's a lot of capacity, I think, in the budget for one-time asks, but not clear on longer, bigger asks supporting program development and implementation. So I can help. I probably am more helpful on the one-time asks and helping you support that, but the kinds of questions you're diving into, Gina, are like bigger funding issues and like where are there gaps or more state funding needed, like weatherization is a great example. Like
Yeah.
we're sort of floating the boat with federal dollars, but there's going to be a cliff. So how are we going to pay for that long term?
I mean, this kind of gets back to the need for the policy, because that's going to bring a certain amount of money. Cap and trade would bring in money, and that's part of the sell of that. As we understand, we're going to need a certain amount to fill the gap for the incentive programs primarily, but there could be other needs around infrastructure.
Yeah.
Not to
So-
mention bike ped and in transit and all that stuff, which I think we're going to have a good sense of that from the study, the carbon reduction study. So maybe we don't need to worry about that now in terms of the first bullet.
I mean, it feels like to me that we should focus on one-time asks, like, because we know we're going to need more dollars. We need to understand what that, exactly how much and what does that need, but that speaks to the policy, which is what we're trying to point towards with the limited information we have at this moment, to push for a economy-wide.
I agree on the research front, modeling and all that, that's all one time, but these ongoing needs, if we don't address them, then we've really.
Yeah, and I feel like the memo speaks to that, but for the budget conversation, I feel like we should maybe identify like the one-time asks and take our best stab at in a guesstimate of approximate investment to undertake it.
Yeah.
And
As long as there's a caveat that these are one-time asks, but they're big long-term needs, ongoing, the present and future. I mean, that's because if we think we can just put $50,000 in here and $100,000 in there and mission accomplished, we're kidding ourselves. It's going to be major.
mhm. So in terms of the first bullet, I mean, I think like a dusting off and looking at the components in there that we might want to recommend. Let's not necessarily do that now unless anything is top of mind for people in terms of implementation. Colin, were you going to say
I
something?
can't think of it.
Well, I guess my question, it actually goes back to something that we talked about a little bit at our meeting this morning, Jane, was whether some of this ask can be for funding like additional EV incentive funding, that kind of a one-time ask, or if this is more just kind of the analyses and things. Because I think a lot of the analyses that we're going to need to kind of come up with an actual budget number are kind of ongoing, like the EV incentive optimization study or the EVSC kind of study that's going on right now. And without that information, I don't know if you can come up with a great number. I mean, it's going to be high, so it probably doesn't really matter if you have that number or not. But if you want an actual definitive number on that you can hang your hat on number of EV charging stations you need to have 126,000 EVs on the road, that kind of a thing. So I guess that's a question, because that could obviously be a huge ask if you can say, well, let's put some of this money towards some of these actual actions that we put forward in the climate action plan, like the incentives really is what I'm driving at mostly. But I guess kind of an open question.
Andrea or Gina, I'd be curious to hear you guys speak to how, I mean, these are general funds, essentially. So I'd be curious, like, where and how general fund has been applied to help advance transportation policy like this in the past.
I'm racking my brain right now thinking of something and I'm having a hard time. Because they have their own,
Normally federal funds.
it's, well, and then there's a state transportation program too.
Right.
So I,
I mean, I think we can do some work on this. And it's still a little bit unclear to me, like the separation of the funding sources and like what we should be putting forth. Like, do we put stuff in here that the agency is going to be doing their own thing? So it's not, that separation for me is a little tricky right now. So like, do we put things in here that the agency is doing? No, we shouldn't. It's like separate and beyond, or.
yeah, I think it should be an appendix or something. I mean, it's all the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been struggling with that too, Andrea, internally, like things that we know we want to ask for within A&R's budget for like additional capacity or analyses for next year. Many of them will dovetail with things that the council is going to ask for, but
Right.
do those get added in now, spoken to outside, like kind of a funny process?
Yeah, it came up in the rural resilience subcommittee the other day too.
Yeah.
Would be, you
Oh,
know,
yeah. I mean, one thing that's an interesting question for me is to what effect will the new federal incentives, how will that affect what Vermont's doing? That would be an interesting thing for your consultants, Andrea.
yeah, yep. Yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be considered, and yeah. So I think, you know, Patrick and I need to go through all these new funding sources that are coming in. And of course, we're going to be doing it because we need to know how we're going to be spending the money that is coming in, and what we have and what more we need to do to get to the goals, and what we have to offer in that way, and then what the shortfall is. I'm not going to have that done by like tomorrow.
Of course.
That is great. That's really impressive. You're gonna have that done by tomorrow.
I think these are just ongoing issues for the council, really. It's not going to get solved, but it's very important to know what the costs are, where the money is going to come from. And it's got to be, it's an evolutionary thing. It's not going to be written in stone. I mean, eventually the private sector may be taking over some aspects, particularly around charging infrastructure.
So
Anyway.
it feels like those larger sort of programmatic capacity or policy questions are maybe too big right now to dial in. But I appreciate that that kind of question and guidance was lifted up by Jared and isn't very clear how to inform right now. But if there are ideas around like where you think general funder is applicable in this space, because that's really what this is, you know, extra general fund.
I mean, I have some thoughts. I don't have necessarily dollar amounts, and I'd be curious, Jane, if you're hearing from other subcommittees about concrete asks that they're making that might trigger us to, you know, think about concrete asks that we'd make. But to me, it seems like just writ large. I mean, I mentioned this before, like the Climate Council needs like some capacity as the, you know, to maintain its work, and that maybe, you know, and certainly in the public engagement and outreach, I mean, we're probably going to need some dollars to do that work ongoing and better. And it would be helpful if there was some capacity to support that work. Feels like modeling.
Yeah, that third bullet that's where you're going to spend general fund money. It's not just the modeling.
That's outside of the carbon reduction strategy.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, that's happening. It's happened before. We've modeled several different things in the past. It's happening in the carbon reduction strategy. I think this is an affirmation of the fact that we need to do it. Like, what can we do in the short term? There may be an analysis of that. And it feels like dollars to support like looking at the EV incentive program, or maybe this is through the carbon reduction strategy. I'm really struggling with what all the carbon reduction strategy is going to answer in a very different timeline, and how do we keep the ball moving forward? Like, what do we actually need to do in the interim?
I'm struggling to see how it's a different timeline. I've been struggling with that all along, because by the time this gets anywhere, this recommendation gets anywhere and gets developed into action,
Mhm.
it's going to be November 2023. Like, it's not going to happen in March. I don't know. I don't know.
I was wrestling with the exact same thing as I was editing it. How are we gonna, what is it we need to do in the interim? Because
Well-
that's really what this is about. This is big, but maybe it's not prudent to put all our eggs in the carbon reduction basket. I mean, do you feel confident, Andrea, that we're gonna get everything that council needs to move forward with all the policies and analysis by the time the carbon reduction strategy is over?
I guess it's difficult to say that with, and I don't really know what this modeling, what level of detail this is going to get us. The modeling is intended, or what the vision for the outcome is. And just, I think I don't see that because I'm not Jared, or I'm not somebody who's engulfed in this, you know.
I'm not
for
Jared
years.
either, but I'll tell you, we need to know what the effects are going to be on a cap and trade program. The economic effects of a cap and trade program are going to be on the state of Vermont. We need to answer that question.
Well, isn't the carbon reduction strategy going to tell us which of those two? Well, the assumption is we're going to see in phase one that we can't meet the emission reduction targets without a sector-wide policy. And then phase two is going to tell us what the best sector-wide policy is. So maybe this modeling bullet should say any supplemental modeling to further refine the carbon reduction strategy to ensure Vermont has like the level of analysis it needs to understand the benefits and disadvantages of policy to communicate. Like, not, it would be the analysis we've finally gotten to that we're going to do for the buildings and thermal space for the policy that, and maybe that you're going to do that in the carbon reduction strategy, Andrea, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have those.
Once you pick.
We're going to have those scenarios of analysis done, one that just looks at our programs, one that just looks at policy, and then at least one or two more. I can't remember if we said a minimum of 4, that has some combination of all of those and puts forth some strategy that is the most cost effective, you know, those 4 most cost effective scenarios.
Andrea, are
And
you
it's going to have all
required?
those criteria that we worked on, right, Joey?
Right.
And Andrea?
Yes, we've discussed that, and that's
Mm.
implicit. But Andrea, are you required to do that for the carbon reduction strategy? Like, look at carbon pricing, cap and invest, performance-based standards, like you've articulated. Are you required to?
No.
Well,
No, the carbon reduction program guidance had some sort of generalities of like what else the program might consider. And it said something about like state, like look at the state initiatives or something. It was pretty broad. And we took that interpretation to get us to those 4 asked for scenarios, knowing that we were trying to go that direction with a technical analysis through the climate action or climate alliance that we weren't able to do. And so we wrote that scope of work based on our interpretation of, you know, the scope of the guidance. And we ran it by our federal highway and they agreed to it.
I think it's
Yeah.
very powerful that this would come from the council, not just a few people sitting around in A&R. This is like, so in all due respect, this is something the council's putting forward. So federal highway very often will defer to state initiatives like that. They're big. This is big. It's in statute, in Vermont statute that we do this. So the feds, I think, are going to push back on this. I don't believe.
Well, so in this recommendation here, and to get to the actual question at hand right now around budget, is maybe this bullet should be refined though to actually tie this modeling to supplemental, like further Vermont analysis needed on the policy that is put forward by the carbon reduction strategy. And it might not be needed, or it may be needed, but if it is, then it's here, and funding associated with it would be important. And this funding wouldn't be available till fiscal year 24. So then we would have have a good sense of what the carbon reduction strategy is telling us by July 1st. And if we need to engage in further modeling, we would be able to do so.
We'll have the carbon reduction strategy draft, the draft strategy by around September timeframe.
A year from now.
Yeah.
You know, I hate to say it, but I think we have to work through this. I mean, a lot's going to be changing with the federal program rolling out the way it is. So, I mean, I don't ever want to say we need to slow down at all, but it just seems like if we tried, what would we do this year aside from the carbon reduction strategy? And put full bore on that. I'm having a hard
But
time.
we'll know by March, right, Andrea, that whether, isn't there, the phase 1 will be done by March. And then we'll know, yeah.
Phase 1
we've
will
got
be
it,
done by
like,
January. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to know really soon that hands down, we need a sector-wide policy. And so to me,
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of
the
analysis.
public, this one.
We know this.
Yeah, that's the thing we got to really work on during this time.
So that it's a slam dunk when you go to the legislature in 24, that like, here's a cap and invest, this is why we need it, and this is how we built support over the last year to get there.
I mean, VTrans is putting money into public outreach, but the council needs to add a lot of value to that through just transitions and other, whatever the council think needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, Jane, we go up one more time to like the modeling piece. I mean, the reason I say that I sort of struggle with the timeline of it, and the reason I asked the question about is it required, is because we've done modeling in the past. It generally says the same thing. Now we have this new infusion of dollars in the carbon reduction strategy that is requiring us to assess, and will be a really pivotal, you know, like investment that will help us do more. And it will be really informative, as we've articulated in the memo, to what more we need to do. I think, you know, originally our hope was to have found the funds through Climate Alliance or whatever to like do the modeling to point in a direction that says to do that more early in service of the legal timeline. And so I'm wondering, is there when you say supplemental, Jane, is there something that makes me think of, is there something that would be helpful to inform whomever you hire as a contractor, so that they could, I mean, to build off of the analyses that we've done to date that already says we got to do more and it's cost effective over time, and this is how you could like make sure that it's equitable. Like I don't know if we need to.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the term modeling, because if we, like, when you keep saying like, we have the analyses that tells us we need to do this, what more are we doing through this new modeling suggestion, and what are those tangible steps?
Well, I mean, I think we need a level of refinement. I mean, if you think back to like the decarbonization analysis that you said, that said like you could either do carbon pricing, but carbon pricing without like an investment strategy doesn't get you there. And like, or you need like a cap and invest program, because it's the investment piece that like will get you, you know, 4 times more pollution reductions. Like, so.
Well, I guess we've been circling in on either cap and invest, cap reduce, or a performance standard, but we don't have those. Well, one, without TCI, which is not probably coming back online in our timeline of like joining that in a year, there's not a Vermont analysis of what it would mean to join WCI, for instance.
Right.
And then there's no Vermont design of what it would cost to stand up a performance standard on our own without
Yeah.
other state cooperation. And I mean, there's just like,
Mhm.
there is no
Blank slate.
yeah. So
Right,
that,
so the,
I keep
Okay.
thinking the carbon reduction strategy is going to tell us which of those at some course level, but there might actually still need to be more modeling
Oh, there
to
will
really
be.
dive into what the
Yes,
details
definitely.
look like.
There will be.
Yeah.
but my question is, because of the, you know, the gap between now and September, what more could we be doing in this moment to set your contractor and make sure that there's the strongest foundation of information based on the analyses that we have done and the gaps that we know that exist? You know, you just articulated some of them. We don't have the
I-
infrastructure
Joey,
to.
I have no doubt Cambridge will exhaust everything that's out there. I'm sure they will. I'm sure VTrans, I'm not sure, but I assume VTrans has told them to, you know, look at all existing data and information and reports and,
Yeah, I mean, we included those in our scope of work
yeah.
to them, and, or, you know, as much as, I don't know, as much as we all reviewed and provided input of what's out there to review. And I'm sure through the, you know, the technical committee and the advisory committee, those things can change with whatever else might be available to analyze things with. And you're right, you know, I mean, they're a leading consultant in this realm of work, and
All
they're
over the
looking at,
country.
yeah. They're gonna look at everything, but I can't say for sure that it's gonna come out and say, you should be doing this and this is what it's gonna cost to
Mhm.
implement on a statewide level. I don't know that that's what we're gonna get out of that. I don't think it is.
There will
I
be
guess the question, Andrea, is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeannie.
there will be unanswered questions, and we're going to need to add value when the work is complete. As you articulated before, Jane, is to add value to that work. I think now the challenge is to make sure we're doing the communication and the public involvement about all of this. At the most basic level about transportation needs and low and moderate income families, and also communicating with our constituencies around transportation constituencies around these programs and these ideas that are getting floated, making sure people don't wake up next March and say, what's this study that VTrans did? Really getting a good, strong conversation going about it. That's going to take a lot of
So
work.
I guess, one, I had a question for Andrea just about the modeling, and if we get to the end of the carbon reduction strategy and want to go deeper or more refined in Vermont, is that something that the carbon reduction strategy fund can pay for, or is that something we should be planning for to have funding in our budget to help support that? I guess, so that's the question. And
I
then
think it would
two, I'll
probably be
just-
safest to have money in the budget to do that, because, I mean, it has a bunch of criteria that these scenarios have to come out with, and there is cost effectiveness, but it doesn't, I don't believe that it goes into the detail of what is it gonna cost the state to do this, and
yeah,
maybe that could be added to the scope, that analysis, but that's a tough thing for me to say right now of where we might land at that point in time. So, or whatever else might be done.
And probably a
So-
tough thing
or
for
like,
a consultant to answer, considering they may not know. I mean, they're not internal to VTrans. But I can imagine there would be more work to do there.
I
I
guess
mean, they're
what I was
doing a
just gonna say
cost-effective analysis of our programs to say,
Yeah.
it's better if you put more money into this and, you know,
Mhm.
but it's counterproductive if you're gonna put millions into this and only get a 0.2% reduction, you know?
Mhm.
what I was just going to say is the meeting at Georgetown Climate Center that Megan and Michelle and I went to, what we were able to hear from other states is, you know, the only state looking at a performance standard in the transportation space right now that's near us is New York, and they're not going to partner and bring Vermont in. So there's also this like, nobody else is looking at transportation policy right now very thoughtfully, which is interesting, and it's largely because of the influx of federal dollars just to put EVs on the road, EV incentives and charging infrastructure, and everybody's struggling with like, well, how far is that going to get us, and what's next? And so there's just this like practical nature of like Vermont cannot afford to stand up a performance standard on our own. Like administratively, it would be impossible. Like, so there's also this like component of analysis that has to happen around like, how are we going to, I don't even know. That's where my head starts to spin. Like, if no other Northeast state is really looking at this right now, then how do we say we're going to adopt one in 2024? But all of this is to say, I feel like the language around the modeling component could be tightened a bit to build off of the carbon reduction strategy. And my other comment is what other states are really talking about again is this part and how to revive the programmatic function from TCI that was envisioned for TCI to track fuel data as part that was going to be stood up before TCI went into effect. And so this just feels like there's probably something to be done here, and probably funding to be looked at and studying how Vermont participates in this.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something also that we would want to do collaboratively with other states, because the hope would be that we would then have data collaboratively to inform a policy collaboratively. Also, it's just like, it's so hard because we're just like not really capable of doing much on our own.
I totally agree with you on the data part, Jane. I don't know what that dollar amount would be in the exact piece of work, but I think that yes, there would be work to be done there. I also think that I mean, in terms of this thing here about modeling, it may not be it may be an apt term, but not like all that needs to be done. And maybe it's just like an analysis of like it's more like what would need to happen to drive any of these outcomes? Like, what would you need to establish? And that kind of an assessment that would, that's the kind of stuff I'm wondering about, like, what do we need to understand? And that's what I'm saying about it informing the
That
consultants'
makes sense,
work.
Joey, actually.
Oh,
Well,
thank
the
you,
public
Brand.
engagement, I will just say the public engagement, we have the contract with CBI that's expiring at the end of September. And we have a larger public engagement facilitation RFP that's about to go out. ANR has sort of built into our base funding money to support that indefinitely on behalf of climate action. We have $200,000 in annual appropriation for facilitation and public engagement. And so thinking about how you plug in with the list of public engagement funding ideas that is coming out of the public engagement task group and just transitions would be really good, and having them help you speak to what's needed for transportation. So Sue is leading a call on that tomorrow morning to talk about just transitions and request budget asks, and I would encourage having her speak to the need for transportation. I don't really know what it looks like.
Having Sue speak to the need for transportation?
Well, Sue's making a collective big ask about public engagement needs on behalf of the Just Transition Subcommittee. So better to plug into that process or think about how it dovetails with that is all I was suggesting.
And that conversation is happening tomorrow morning?
They already had it as a subcommittee, and Sue's refining it tomorrow with a small group around like budget amounts, like dollars.
Okay. Is there a list that we can share? And do you have a suggestion on process for plugging in to that?
Oh, yeah, my head's spins, but let me think. We have a public engagement sort of operations plan that's sort of guiding the work, that being, that's focused on partner engagement really around the ask, and like even is getting built upon with like the biomass task group has outreach needs also that is getting honed in, and sort of built into that process too around long-term engagement in the old North End that has components of biomass, but is more broadly focused on climate. I think transportation is just another avenue to connect with people. So it's like, what are your focus groups? You're like, who are you trying to reach, and how do you bring transportation into the conversation so that we're hitting Vermonters broadly on climate, and then they understand the impacts of how transportation affects that. So I don't have a specific component other than the transportation events in the fall will give us a lot of flavor for that, and then we can continue to think about how transportation gets lifted up through the partner engagement we do.
Well, the transportation
There's
events,
just so much. What?
you mean advanced clean cars
was
and
just-
advanced clean trucks, Jane? Those events?
Yes.
I think they will be helpful. It also feels like this is where I would benefit from a sort of public engagement strategist to ask the question of what's helpful, you know, to, you know, not just like we've had a lot of conversations and we need to have more about asking people their transportation challenges and needs, but like it does seem like we need to hone in, and maybe there are focus groups with multifamily, you know, dwelling owners about, or people who live in multifamily dwelling units to like understand, well, what kind of transportation are you using? Would you have an EV if you did? Like, I mean, it feels like something that's a little bit more tangible, because we're still sort of, like moving between this like very high level policy space where we don't have an identified policy for people to weigh in on, and just the need to get down to like brass tacks about like, well, how do you make it real by if we're deploying all these dollars on the ground through these federal funds? Like, is there a public engagement strategy? Yes, I totally hear you, Jane. And my question is, I'd like to think public engagement matters, but asking people a specific question, not just like transportation is a challenge and, you know, like what would be helpful to V-Trans and to like people's lives. You live in a multifamily unit in Bellows Falls. You'd like an electric vehicle, but you can't necessarily A, afford it yet, but B, like, what does that mean for living in your multifamily unit? Is there like, if I'm just trying to think about like, what are the concrete things that we know are going to be barriers and or challenges? And is there a public engagement strategy around that to understand? And that's just one example.
Just brings up a couple of things for me right now. Besides the fact that I'm getting worried that my kid's not home yet. I'm thinking I should go look for him, but he's supposed to be home like half an hour ago. And it may dovetail into like the public outreach stuff and the efforts that we're doing for the advanced clean cars too in the next couple of weeks. But you know, Patrick and I were thinking about using that as a public engagement sort of outreach for us too, and using our table to understand some of those things so that we don't necessarily have to come back to them another time and go to these same communities and say, you know, somebody was just here talking about transportation something or other, but now we're here to talk about the other transportation something or other that you can't really tell the difference between anyway, you know, because you're not that engaged. So like, what can we do during these events to kind of piggyback on them and get some input to our initiatives and some, you know, obviously the point of us being there is to tell them about programs that we have, but to understand their challenges more. And then there's also going to be, you know, public outreach as we develop our carbon reduction strategy. So throughout next year, and our NEVI plan and our EVSE deployment plan. And
right. Yeah. Well, Joey, when I was hearing you talk, it feels like the question actually at hand sometimes is, yeah, we need to do everything that Andrea's just talking about too, and you're talking about, but you are sort of in a time where you need to say, how would you get something across the finish line with the legislature? Like, what do Vermonters need to buy into this?
Buy into what? That's the thing, is we don't have a policy or big push for them to buy into, which is why I keep pushing for, like,
Exactly.
I'm struggling with that because I feel like we did with TCIP, and we should, because we have a legal obligation, and we don't have the answers to understand which one yet. But that's what I'm struggling with, like, A, the entire process, and B, like, what's the public engagement ask? And that's why I'm just throwing out different that we haven't asked before, or that we couldn't already ask at upcoming events, as Andrea's articulating. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a good vision.
Mhm.
Besides what Andrea just said, felt like the vision. Like, whenever you can talk about it more broadly, not just.
Yeah.
I mean, the McNeil conversation was a good one. I'll just say that task group wanted to have a listening session in the Old North End, and when we pulled together the right people to talk about it, they were like, "You want to go to the Old North End and talk about McNeil? That's crazy. Like, most people won't know what it is. They won't associate it with climate. Like, you need to do all this groundwork first in a community that has no trust for state government, or any government really, because they've been left behind in many cases, or left out of processes. So what you need to do is, like, talk about climate broadly, have peer-to-peer surveys, somehow bring McNeil in if you want, and see how you get them to talk about that, and then commit to long-term engagement with the Old North End around climate issues, and do that through a trusted community resource like the Boys and Girls Club, which is the community gathering place of that space. So it's like everything just takes a lot of time to build trust and relationships. So I'm not going to have answers for any of this stuff quickly.
Okay.
And I don't feel like I'm a public engagement strategist either. So, but hopefully we'll have some resources when we have someone here in the climate office to help think about that more broadly, and what our vision is for how we're going to do that, and be responsive to the public also.
I feel like we should also have our finger on the pulse of, like, how the public wants to be engaged, and do they want to be engaged, or they just want us to, like, do the stuff and, like, think about these sort of characteristics and principles. And I don't have an answer to that question. I hear a lot about it. I get that there's a need. I've been working on it for a long time. The stuff that I've been hearing, it's not radically different over the course of time, except obviously the need to, like, focus both better in process and policy design on the equity stuff. But I'm just struggling with what is value add and making good use of people's time and budgetary expenses to do this work. Like, what's the need? I'd like to fill the need, but I don't really know with clarity.
I think
Yeah.
Jane raised an excellent point, and that is, most people don't even know that they should be concerned. So how do you start having a conversation about it? About some of the issues that are germane to the transportation part of the plan. So then you've got to, start informing them of the larger issues, and then in a way that they want to actually participate in, if they're living incredibly busy lives, and if they have extra time off, why do they want to talk about this?
They
So-
probably,
You
they might not.
Yeah. I mean, you look at attendance at town meeting day, for instance, as an indicator of people's voluntary desire to engage with public policy. And it's whatever it is, like 8% or 10% or something, right? If that, actually. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people, no matter how well you communicated to them about the effect that climate change is going to have on their lives, and the state and federal government's efforts to how those efforts are going to impact their lives, won't engage, right? Like, there's just some portion of the population who it's just not what they do. And, I'm speaking half from our experience last year here, and half from our experience on the tax structure commission of making a sort of big public engagement effort online and in person and traveling around the state and all these things. Sort of how people find out about what we're doing and find out about how to engage is a tricky question. Like, the means of communication available to us don't get everybody. Then making it accessible in sort of all dimensions of what that means. And part of it means just making it physically accessible. What if you're doing it in person, or making sure people have the ability to connect online if you're doing it online, but also making it accessible in the sense that they understand and feel comfortable that they're being invited to a space they're going to feel comfortable in, and that there's going to be content that makes sense to them and all those things. I'm suggesting all of the challenges and don't have much to offer in the way of how one addresses them and effectively connects to all the people you want to connect to. But I'm glad to hear that there will be someone who is actually a professional. As you know, I agree with Jane. I am not a public engagement expert, as I have proven by many failed efforts. So glad there'll be someone who is.
I think working through trusted partners is key. That you've got to find the organizations and groups like the Boys Club, Girls Club in the North End, who you can work with. I've said, because of my role on the food shelf in Hardwick, I participated in a food security workshop. The Sustainable Jobs Fund is putting a food security plan policy in place. It's a plan, and they I thought, an excellent job at this sort of networking model to get input into that process. And it seemed like it was through organizations that have direct contact with people. So it's finding those organizations, making contact, and presumably Just Transitions got that somewhat dialed in.
It'd be helpful to hear from Just Transitions what they think would be helpful in this moment, but
Exactly.
I don't know in the
And-
transportation
and-
space.
And really, we need to work with them. I would say they're in the lead. We just need to make sure that we're getting, information around transportation, and we should work with them on that. I think, which Jane has already said.
Speaking of that, Sebi has been our liaison, and he's been very helpful in that space, and he will no longer be in that role at some point. Is that true? He's not here today.
I didn't know that.
I don't know. I'm just saying he's not here today, and I don't know if there's a long-term conduit. If I haven't heard.
Are you not telling us something that you're dropping news on us that we shouldn't know yet?
I'm gonna let him share
I-
news with you all, but I think
Okay.
I don't know if he'll stay in that role, because if he will be
Mhm.
able to. So.
Okay.
But he has been
That's too
here,
bad. He is really great.
trying to be liaison between us and Just Transitions, and I don't know if
They'll put someone else in if he leaves.
right. But I think he would have good thoughts on process and timing for asking a specific question around that. And anyway, if they're asking for specific dollars tomorrow, our issues are not out there, and we don't. So
Okay. Yeah, he didn't
I don't.
participate in the budget conversation with them.
He did or did not. Yeah, no.
He was
I think
away.
He's been on vacation. Yeah. All right. So I'm lacking a little clarity about what our budget asks would be. Feels like, do other folks have specific ideas? I mean, I think we would need some dollars to do some of this, but I don't have
I would
specific
just
amounts or priority.
reiterate how important community engagement is, making sure that there's support there that would be additive to transportation. And then you could ask, Colin's not on the call anymore, but you could ask Colin, Brian, and Megan if there's any, we talked a little bit about this morning, but any tangible next steps in the emissions reporting space that would need some analysis or money put towards it.
Yep. Okay.
And then if you want to have funding ready to support any of that additional Vermont analysis that would be complementary to the carbon reduction strategy.
Mhm.
Is the EV incentives issues that's raised in the fourth bullet, Andrea, is that getting covered in the work that you guys are doing to look at your programs? Or is there a need for additional research?
Right now, we don't have something saying we will look at super users in our scope of work for the consultant,
Right.
but it is, all in the name of getting, making the most of our incentives for carbon reductions. So in an equitable way.
So adding value to that research to cover the super user issue, is that something we want to dive into?
Yeah, I can't say for sure that
I can't either.
that would be covered by what our consultant is looking at necessarily.
What do the others think?
I think I heard that a gas-powered car tends to have about an 18-year lifespan. So if we stop selling new ones in 2035, they're likely to be kicking around until 2053 or so. And it just feels as though there is an opportunity to, if there is a way to remove the most polluting vehicles first, it will pay disproportionate dividends in terms of reduction of our carbon emissions. And I think it's a combination of the people who drive, like it's miles driven versus inefficiency of the vehicle, right? Both are factors in how much carbon a particular vehicle is putting into the atmosphere. But it does seem that it would be valuable to put some resources to figuring out if there is a way to remove the most polluting vehicles earlier in the process rather than later. And Jane, your comment, turnover, I don't know, is that from new to dead or is that from new to when you sell it?
I wish Colin was still on the call because he can recite this like off the back of his head, but the like average like life expectancy of a car in Vermont is 9 years, is the way I have heard him describe it.
Yeah, well, that may be true. Maybe that rust makes them undrivable before.
I was going to say, you can thank us for the salt in the inspection programs.
Yeah.
Wait, that should be one of our strategies. More salt on the road.
I find those are holding. I find that the newer cars, like my 2012 Prius, it's not rusting, but the equipment, the computers and stuff are just, when they go, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's closer to 10 years too. But I'm also not in the position of having to make my car last for as long as possible. Once it gets to a certain point, I'm like, all right, I'm getting a new car.
Cars have so much plastic on them now that I don't know that the rust is such an issue that it used to be. Anyway.
All right, well, we'll see. Do we want to divide this up and maybe, Gina, do you want to like ask Chris Company? Like, is there, I don't know, like, it does seem like there may be some useful piece of work to do a little bit more of an assessment of like through an equity lens and a super user lens, like, what kind of an assessment that could inform the carbon reduction strategy to look at that, and even to know, like, verify some of these numbers.
When is the VTRIAN study, that study going to be done, Andrea, the incentive study?
The incentive optimization, it will come with our annual report at the end of this year.
Yeah.
Oh,
January.
So maybe we should, when that comes out, then assess.
Or is there a supplemental need, Andrea, would the consultants have capacity if you wove into their contract, if you could, like a more clear focus on this and this component of it?
Yeah, I can talk to Patrick about where they're at. I'm not even sure that this amendment for this has been completely has gone through completely yet. So there might be some room. I just need to talk to him about that.
Okay, that'd be helpful. And maybe
I
are
also
you able
think, like,
to,
there's a bigger conversation about, like, this is what, where the state is and what we're looking at and what we feel like we have funding to do and how much we can move the needle on that. It's to me, a little bit separate from necessarily what goes into this memo. I don't necessarily know.
this isn't
that-
in the memo. I think the idea is
I
just,
know.
are there components of the memo? It's just like, what are, yeah, and this is all advisory too, to what we would ask for our budget ask too. So, yeah. But I hear you. I think that makes sense what you're saying.
We've got,
Um,
we got to see what's going on now and how that's working before we start building a bigger program, in my opinion. But
Yeah,
well, this is just adding a little bit more. I think the goal would be to have, I think, if I'm channeling Chris Campany, a little bit more context to potentially like structure a program that would cost effectively. You could efficiently tailor a program to do that, to drive more emissions reductions, to like, I don't know. It may not
drive
be a
more
thing, but it
emission
would be
reductions,
helpful
make
to,
it more common in certain.
I mean, it could be as
Simple.
simple as people in the Northeast Kingdom are more, the incentives more available to them. If you live in certain rural towns, you're going to have a leg up because we're going to assume that you're driving more. That would be the
and
simplest,
or
easiest way to deal with it.
there may just be characteristics of places or, yeah. But I don't know. It seems like a little bit more refinement about what would be, what that piece of.
Yeah.
All right.
So we're not ready to ask for more money for this now.
I don't think we have clarity on exactly what we'd want to be asking for. Are people actually able to attend the cross-sector meeting? And maybe we could do a little bit more legwork between now and then to help clarify what may be helpful.
Mhm.
I mean, we don't have a meeting next week because it's Labor Day, but
Yeah.
maybe we can have a dialogue over or a smaller group meeting just to hammer it out a little bit more.
The goal for the meeting on the 7th, as far as budget goes, is what? Just to,
I think it's to prepare Rich and TJ so that they can present the overall subcommittee budget request to the council on the 12th.
on the 12th. Yeah, to me, that feels really soon.
Mhm. And it just feels soon for like, they're like really they're prepared on the budget. Like they're getting to it early, right? So it feels like it does feel a little soon, but I mean, I appreciate that. And at the same time,
Mhm.
like we don't have enough clarity at this moment to make a cogent ask. Okay. Can we just move past this conversation since we don't really know and maybe we have some more work to do okay, that'd be great. Is there anything else to say? I think we've been going back and forth on all the upcoming events. They
Megan,
need to be staffed. Megan just sent an email about what,
help.
the specific places, and she's asking to know who's attending what. I shared that with her. I think it'd be great if others did as well. And, I know you all are taking on, that'd be great. Jane, that would be really great. Because that seems like substantive and very helpful. That seems like a really important piece of this work. So if people can just respond to Megan, and I know several of us are planning to attend several and been organizing that over email. And people should be promoting it to the best of our ability. And is Just Transitions promoting it, Jane, or like the groups involved? Okay. Good. And Megan and Rachel have been attending those meetings. Did Rachel ever put anything out there with a little bit more clarity around what the opportunity is in advancement cars related to the equity?
We're so close.
Okay.
Today.
Excellent. Can't wait to see.
We have there's a one-pager that we've been working on around transportation and climate, and then a one-pager that is about the rules. And then we're also doing like a flyer for people who are visual, and some of the people on Just Transitions are doing translation and some other components.
Great.
Okay.
Good.
Is there anything else that people want to say about those events? There's a lot happening.
Megan, I think she's probably communicated with all of you, but if you've agreed to, Joey, maybe it's just you, Joey, are you facilitating
Andrea.
one?
Andrea?
Andrea's doing Bellas Falls and you're doing Burlington. Is that what's happening?
Mhm.
Think so?
Okay. And then you know that when we met last week about it, because I'm facilitating Newport and Barry, that we thought it would be great if all facilitators could come to Manchester.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's my plan.
Okay. Okay, great.
That's a Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can do all of these things.
I offered to help in Barry because I'll be back then.
Okay. That's great. Yeah.
That's great.
That's the APA one, so that's important. one.
Okay.
Probably get a good turnout.
All right. There's probably not much more to say about the carbon reduction strategy. We've talked a lot about it already woven throughout the conversation, unless there's any updates. Andrea, okay.
No.
Anything else? Public
Oh,
comment?
I said, well, I don't know why I said no. Sorry. That's your answer.
There's not. We'll be meeting hopefully next week to kick off the technical committee.
That's great. Public comment?
Well,
Okay.
Did we need to respond to you, Andrea, if we were going to be on that, or?
Well, I asked people to respond. Some people did, some people did not. I think the invite from the consultant went out to everybody that was on that email.
Oh, I bet it went to my account, my state account, which I never checked. Okay, that's okay. I didn't get anything,
Should
but
have gone to the same email that my email went to.
no.
I didn't get one. I would have
You
responded and said yes on
would.
the advisory.
You're not on the technical one.
It
Bill.
was only
Oh,
for
on
the
the technical one.
committee. It's like, you're not invited to the technical committee. You will be
That's
invited
fine.
to the advisory committee, but we're not getting that group together until a little bit later.
Great.
Technical committee was supposed to do a survey. I mean, they said fill it out today. I can forward that to you, Gina, if you need me to. But
I'll-
which email?
You'd send it to the Gmail.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
All right. Well, we're all walking away with a high level of certainty and clarity. Mhm.
Always.
Always.
Just how every meeting feels to me.
I know one thing. I will definitely look at that memo again just to make sure.
Thank you.
There's nothing glaring, and get back to you in the next day or so.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, all.
Buddy.
Nice to see you folks. Bye. How do you stop recording?
I'm gonna find it.
Bye, Bram. How do you stop the recording? Oh.